The snow fell gently outside the grand windows of Kensington Palace, each flake dancing in the golden light that spilled from the warm rooms within. Princess Elena stood at her bedroom window, watching the white blankets slowly cover the perfectly manicured gardens. At 28 years old, she had grown accustomed to spending Christmas in the public eye, but this year felt different. This year, she felt more alone than ever before. The palace buzzed with activity as staff members hurried through the corridors, preparing for the annual Christmas festivities. The sound of their footsteps echoed through the marble halls, mixing with the distant chatter of voices and the occasional ring of a telephone. Elena pressed her forehead against the cool glass, her breath creating small clouds of fog that quickly disappeared. Her lady-in-waiting, Margaret, knocked softly on the door before entering. The older woman had served the royal family for over 30 years, and her kind eyes immediately noticed the princess's melancholy mood. Margaret carried a silver tray with steaming tea and fresh scones, the comforting aroma filling the room as she set it down on the antique table near the fireplace. "Your Highness, you've been standing there for nearly an hour," Margaret said gently, her voice carrying the warmth of genuine concern. "The tea will help warm you up." Elena turned away from the window, offering a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She had perfected this expression over the years, a diplomatic smile that could fool photographers and dignitaries but never Margaret. The princess moved gracefully across the room, her silk robe flowing behind her like water. "I was just thinking about Christmas when I was little," Elena said, settling into the plush armchair beside the fireplace. The flames crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows across her delicate features. "Do you remember how excited I used to get? I would barely sleep on Christmas Eve, and I'd wake up before dawn to see if Father Christmas had come." Margaret's face softened with the memory as she poured the tea into fine china cups decorated with tiny painted roses. "I remember having to practically drag you away from the Christmas tree every evening in December. You would sit there for hours, just staring at the presents, trying to guess what was inside each one." The princess laughed softly, a genuine sound that filled Margaret's heart with warmth. "And you would always find me there in the morning, curled up on the rug beneath the tree, fast asleep with my favorite teddy bear." "Prince Theodore," Margaret said with a smile. "You named him after your grandfather." "I still have him," Elena admitted, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "He's in the closet upstairs. Sometimes, when I feel particularly lost, I think about getting him out again." Margaret sat down in the chair across from her, something she rarely did, but the informality of the moment seemed to call for it. "What's troubling you this Christmas, dear one? And, please, speak freely. These old walls have heard far more secrets than anything you could tell me." Elena wrapped her hands around the warm teacup, drawing comfort from its heat. She had been dreading this conversation, but she knew Margaret would see through any attempt to deflect. The older woman had an uncanny ability to read her emotions, a skill honed through years of watching over her. "The Christmas charity gala is in 3 days," Elena began, her voice barely above a whisper. 500 guests, all expecting me to be the perfect princess, smiling and gracious and completely in control. But, inside, I feel like I'm falling apart." Margaret leaned forward, her eyes filled with understanding. She had watched Elena grow from a carefree child into a poised young woman, but she had also witnessed the weight of royal responsibility slowly chip away at her natural spontaneity and joy. "Tell me what's in your heart," Margaret encouraged. Elena set down her teacup and stood up, beginning to pace in front of the fireplace. Her movements were restless, like a caged bird longing for freedom. "I feel so disconnected from everything that used to matter to me. Christmas used to be about magic and wonder and spending time with people I loved. Now it's about photo opportunities and speeches and making sure I don't say anything that might cause a scandal." She paused by the mantelpiece, running her fingers along the edge of a silver-framed photograph. In the picture, a much younger Elena sat on her father's lap while her mother adjusted a crooked Christmas ornament on the tree behind them. Her parents had been gone for 5 years now, victims of a tragic car accident that had thrust Elena into a role she had never expected to inherit so young. "I miss them so much during the holidays," Elena whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "Mother always made Christmas feel special, even with all the royal obligations. She had this way of finding magic in the smallest moments. Father would read us Christmas stories by the fire, doing different voices for all the characters until we were all laughing so hard we could barely breathe. Margaret rose from her chair and moved to stand beside the princess, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. They would be so proud of the woman you've become, Elena. You carry their love and their values in everything you do. But I don't feel like I'm honoring their memory, Elena replied, tears beginning to form in her eyes. I feel like I'm just going through the motions, playing a part that someone else wrote for me. When did Christmas become just another royal duty instead of a celebration of love and family? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with emotion and longing. Margaret had no easy answer because she knew that Elena's struggle was real and valid. The transition from protected princess to reigning monarch had been brutal and swift, leaving little time for grief or adjustment. Perhaps, Margaret said carefully, this year could be different. Perhaps this Christmas could be about rediscovering what the holiday means to you, not as a queen, but as a woman who has loved and lost and is still learning how to find joy again. Elena wiped away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. How can it be different when everything is already planned? The guest list is finalized, the menu is set, the schedule is carved in stone. There's no room for spontaneity or genuine connection. Margaret moved to the window where Elena had been standing earlier, looking out at the snow-covered grounds. In the distance, she could see the lights of London twinkling like earthbound stars. Do you remember the Christmas when you were 12, and the blizzard knocked out the power in half the city? Elena's eyes lit up with the memory. The Christmas dinner had to be cancelled because the kitchen couldn't function without electricity. Mother was beside herself until Father suggested we have a picnic by the fireplace instead. Your parents sent the staff home to be with their families, and the three of you spent the evening eating sandwiches and playing board games by candlelight, Margaret continued. You told me later it was the best Christmas you'd ever had. Because it was real, Elena realized, her voice growing stronger. Because for one night, we weren't performing for anyone. We were just a family, enjoying each other's company. Margaret turned back to face the princess, her eyes sparkling with an idea. What if this year's gala could have elements of that same authenticity? What if, instead of another stuffy formal dinner, you created something that actually brought people together? Elena felt a flutter of excitement in her chest, the first genuine enthusiasm she had experienced in weeks. But how? The planning committee would have a collective heart attack if I suggested major changes this close to the event. Small changes can have a big impact, Margaret suggested. What if you started with yourself? What would make this Christmas meaningful for you? The princess thought for a moment, her mind racing with possibilities. I would want to actually talk to people, not just exchange pleasantries. I would want to hear their stories, learn about their lives outside of their titles and positions. I would want the evening to feel warm and personal, not like a business transaction. Then, start there, Margaret encouraged. You have the power to set the tone for the entire evening. If you approach each interaction with genuine curiosity and warmth, others will respond in kind. Elena felt a spark of hope beginning to grow within her. For the first time in months, she could imagine a path forward that didn't involve simply enduring her responsibilities. What about the children who will be there? The young guests who come with their parents? Margaret smiled, recognizing the caring heart that had always been Elena's greatest strength. What would you want for them? I would want them to feel the magic of Christmas, Elena said without hesitation. I would want them to have an experience they would remember forever, something that would make them smile even when they're adults. Then, make that happen, Margaret said simply. You're not just a figurehead, Elena. You're a woman with the power to create the kind of Christmas you want to have. The princess felt tears welling up in her eyes again, but this time they were tears of gratitude and possibility. For so long, she had felt trapped by the expectations placed upon her, but Margaret's words reminded her that she still had choices. She could choose to approach this Christmas with intention and heart. I want to do something special for the staff too, Elena said, her mind beginning to formulate a plan. They work so hard to make everything perfect, but they rarely get to enjoy the fruits of their labor. They're always serving others, making sure everyone else has a magical experience. Margaret's face lit up with pride. Now you're thinking like the princess I've always known you to be. The one who used to sneak down to the kitchens to help bake cookies, even though it meant getting flour all over your best dress. Elena laughed, remembering those carefree days when she was more concerned with having fun than maintaining her image. Mrs. Hartwell used to let me crack the eggs, even though I always got pieces of shell in the mixture. She said you had the most determined expression she'd ever seen on a child's face, Margaret recalled. You were so focused on getting it right, your tongue poking out slightly in concentration. I want to feel that way again, Elena said suddenly, the words tumbling out with unexpected force. I want to care about something so much that I forget to worry about how I look or what people might think. I want to throw myself into creating something beautiful without calculating the political implications. Margaret reached out and took the princess's hands in her own, squeezing them gently. Then, this Christmas is your opportunity to do exactly that. You have 3 days to transform not just an event, but your relationship with your own life. Elena felt a surge of determination coursing through her veins. The task ahead seemed enormous, but, for the first time in years, it also felt exciting. She wasn't just planning a charity gala anymore, she was reclaiming her sense of purpose and joy. Will you help me? Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. Margaret had been her constant companion through every triumph and tragedy, and she wouldn't abandon her now. My dear girl, Margaret said with a warm smile, I've been waiting for you to ask that question for 5 years. Of course I'll help you. We'll make this the most memorable Christmas the palace has ever seen. As the snow continued to fall outside, Elena felt something shift inside her heart. The heavy weight of obligation was still there, but now it was balanced by something lighter and more powerful, hope. This Christmas wouldn't just be another event to survive, it would be a celebration worth remembering. The two women spent the rest of the afternoon planning and dreaming, their voices mixing with the crackling of the fire and the gentle sound of snow against the windows. And, for the first time in months, Princess Elena fell asleep that night with a smile on her face, dreaming of Christmas magic and the joy of giving from the heart. The next morning dawned bright and clear, with sunlight streaming through the palace windows and casting rainbow prisms across the polished floors. Elena woke with an energy she hadn't felt in months, her mind already buzzing with ideas for transforming the upcoming charity gala. She dressed quickly in a simple sweater and jeans, an outfit that would have scandalized the palace protocol officers but felt perfectly right for the day ahead. Margaret was waiting for her in the private dining room with fresh coffee and warm croissants, along with a stack of notebooks and her reading glasses. The older woman had clearly been awake for hours, already preparing for their ambitious plans. Elena could see lists and sketches scattered across the table, evidence of Margaret's dedication to making their vision a reality. I've been thinking all night, Elena said as she poured herself coffee, the rich aroma helping to clear her mind. If we're going to make this Christmas special, we need to start with the people who make everything possible. The staff who work tirelessly behind the scenes. Margaret nodded approvingly as she opened one of her notebooks. I've made a list of everyone who will be working during the gala, from the kitchen staff to the security team. There are 47 people total, including the temporary staff we bring in for special events. Elena studied the list, recognizing many of the names. These were people who had served her family for years, who knew her favorite foods and remembered her birthday without being reminded. They were the invisible army that kept the palace running smoothly, yet they rarely received the recognition they deserved. What if we created a special moment during the gala just for them? Elena suggested, her excitement growing. Not just a simple thank you, but something meaningful that shows how much we value their dedication. What did you have in mind? Margaret asked, her pen poised to take notes. Elena walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where several groundskeepers were already at work despite the early hour. Something personal. Something that acknowledges each person individually, not just as a collective group. She turned back to Margaret, her eyes bright with inspiration. I want to write personal thank you notes to each staff member, but not just formal acknowledgements. I want to mention specific things they've done, moments when their kindness or hard work made a difference. Then, during the gala, I want to present these notes along with small gifts that are meaningful to each person. Margaret's face lit up with understanding. That would mean learning something special about each person, understanding what matters to them outside of work. Exactly, Elena said, settling back into her chair. Mrs. Hartwell in the kitchen has been talking for months about wanting to visit her sister in Scotland.
James, the head gardener, is always showing me pictures of his grandchildren.
Sarah from housekeeping is studying for her nursing degree in the evenings.
As Elena spoke, Margaret scribbled notes furiously, capturing every detail.
This will require some investigation, but I know just the person to help us.
Mrs. Cooper in Human Resources knows everyone's story.
She makes it her business to remember birthdays, anniversaries, and family milestones.
Perfect, Elena said, then paused as another idea struck her. But I don't want this to feel like charity or pity.
I want it to feel like genuine appreciation between friends.
What if we also ask each staff member to share a Christmas memory or tradition with the gala guests?
Everyone has stories about the holidays that shaped them.
Margaret looked up from her notes, impressed by the princess's thoughtfulness.
You want to give them a voice at the event, not just recognition for their service.
Yes,
Elena exclaimed, jumping up from her chair with enthusiasm.
Imagine how much more meaningful the evening would be if guests heard real stories from real people instead of just polite conversation.
Mrs. Hartwell could share her grandmother's recipe for Christmas pudding. James could talk about the Christmas garden traditions from different cultures.
Sarah could tell us about how her family celebrates in Jamaica.
The dining room seemed to pulse with energy as the two women built upon each other's ideas. Margaret had worked for the royal family long enough to know that events usually followed rigid protocols, but Elena's vision was refreshingly human and authentic. We'll need to approach this carefully, Margaret cautioned gently. Some staff members might feel uncomfortable being put in the spotlight. We should make participation completely voluntary and ensure everyone feels supported.
Elena nodded eagerly.
Of course. And we should prepare them well in advance, help them feel confident and comfortable. Maybe we could have a rehearsal or practice session where they can share their stories in a safe environment first. Margaret made another note, then looked up thoughtfully.
What about the guests? How do we prepare them for this different kind of evening?
That's the beautiful part, Elena said, her voice growing warm with emotion.
We don't tell them exactly what to expect. We let the authenticity speak for itself. When people hear genuine stories and witness real gratitude, they respond naturally. It becomes contagious.
The princess began pacing again, but this time her movements were energized rather than restless.
I also want to incorporate the children in a meaningful way.
Not just as decoration or entertainment, but as active participants in creating Christmas magic. Margaret flipped to a fresh page in her notebook.
How many children will be attending?
About 20, ranging in age from 5 to 15, Elena replied, consulting her own notes. Most are children of the adult guests, but a few are from the children's charities we support.
Elena's eyes sparkled with a new idea. What if we created a special Christmas workshop where the children could make gifts for the staff? Nothing elaborate, just simple, heartfelt crafts that show appreciation. The children would love having a purpose beyond just sitting quietly through dinner. And the staff would be touched to receive something made especially for them, Margaret added, warming to the concept. Children have a way of expressing gratitude that's pure and unfiltered. Exactly.
And, while the children are creating, the adults can participate in the story sharing I mentioned.
It becomes a community experience rather than a formal ceremony.
Margaret set down her pen and looked at Elena with admiration.
You realize this is completely different from any royal Christmas event in modern history? You're creating something unprecedented.
Elena felt a flutter of nervousness, but it was overwhelmed by excitement.
Good. Maybe it's time for something unprecedented.
Maybe it's time for the royal family to show that we're human beings who value the same things as everyone else: connection, gratitude, and genuine celebration. A soft knock at the door interrupted their planning session. Elena called for whoever it was to enter, and Mrs. Cooper from Human Resources appeared with a warm smile and an armful of files. Your Highness, Margaret mentioned you might need some information about our staff members, Mrs. Cooper said, setting the files on a nearby chair. I brought personnel files, but, more importantly, I brought my memory book. She held up a leather-bound journal that looked well-worn and much loved.
For 15 years, I've been keeping notes about our palace family.
Birthdays, achievements, personal milestones, favorite things. I started doing it so I could remember to send cards and small gifts, but it's become a record of all the wonderful people who make this place special. Elena felt tears prick her eyes at this unexpected kindness.
Mrs. Cooper, this is exactly what we need. Would you be willing to help us create something beautiful for each person?
It would be my honor, Your Highness, Mrs. Cooper replied, her own eyes growing misty. I've watched you grow up in this palace, and seeing you care so much about our staff means everything to me. The three women spent the next hour going through Mrs. Cooper's memory book, and Elena was amazed by the depth of information the woman had collected. She knew that Thomas in security was learning to play piano for his daughter's wedding. She remembered that Maria in housekeeping had just become a grandmother for the first time. She had recorded that David in maintenance was building a treehouse for his young son. This is incredible, Elena murmured as she read through the entries.
You've captured so much love and attention to detail. Each person's story is precious.
Mrs. Cooper beamed with pride.
They're all precious people, Your Highness.
Each one brings something special to our palace family. As they worked, Elena began to see her staff not just as employees, but as individuals with rich, complex lives full of hopes, dreams, and challenges. The security guard who always smiled at her in the morning was also a devoted father. The housekeeper who kept her rooms spotless was pursuing her dreams of higher education. The gardener who maintained the beautiful grounds was an artist who saw beauty in every growing thing. I want to meet with each person individually before the gala, Elena announced suddenly. Not formal meetings, but casual conversations where I can really listen to them and understand what would make this Christmas special for them. Margaret and Mrs. Cooper exchanged glances, both touched by the princess's genuine desire to connect. That's a lovely idea, Margaret said, but we only have 2 days.
With 47 people, that's quite ambitious.
Elena grinned, looking more alive than she had in months. Then, we'd better start now.
Mrs. Cooper, could you help me arrange brief meetings throughout today and tomorrow? Maybe during their break times or shift changes, so it doesn't interfere with their work?
Absolutely, Your Highness, Mrs. Cooper said, already mentally organizing the logistics.
I'll start making calls right away.
As Mrs. Cooper left to arrange the meetings, Elena turned to Margaret with gratitude shining in her eyes.
Thank you for believing in this crazy idea. A day ago, I felt hopeless about Christmas. Now I feel like we're about to create something magical.
Margaret reached over and squeezed Elena's hand.
This is who you've always been, dear one.
You're just remembering how to let that person shine through the crown. The morning flew by as Elena prepared for her first round of staff meetings. Instead of her usual formal attire, she chose comfortable clothes that would help people feel at ease around her.
She wanted these conversations to be genuine exchanges, not royal audiences.
Her first meeting was with Mrs. Hartwell, the head cook who had been working in the palace kitchen for over 20 years. Elena found her in the herb garden behind the kitchen, selecting fresh rosemary for the day's lunch preparation.
Mrs.
Hartwell, Elena called out, causing the older woman to look up in surprise.
Do you have a few minutes to chat?
I'm hoping to learn more about what makes Christmas special for you. Mrs. Hartwell wiped her hands on her apron, looking slightly nervous but pleased.
Of course, Your Highness. Though I'm not sure what I could tell you that would be of interest.
Elena settled on a nearby garden bench and patted the space beside her.
Please, sit with me.
And tell me about your most treasured Christmas memory. As Mrs. Hartwell began to speak about Christmas mornings in her childhood home, her face transformed with warmth and joy. She described the way her grandmother would wake before dawn to start the Christmas pudding, how the entire house would fill with the scents of cinnamon and nutmeg and orange peel. She talked about family traditions that had been passed down through generations, recipes that carried love from one kitchen to another. Elena listened with her whole heart, asking questions and sharing some of her own memories.
By the end of their conversation, both women were laughing and wiping away happy tears. Mrs.
Hartwell seemed amazed that a princess would be interested in her simple stories, while Elena felt enriched by the genuine human connection.
Meeting after meeting followed the same pattern.
Elena discovered that James the gardener wrote poetry in his spare time and dreamed of publishing a book about the healing power of gardens. She learned that Sarah the housekeeper was planning to become a pediatric nurse because she wanted to help children feel safe and cared for during difficult times.
Each conversation revealed new depths of character and wisdom. As the day progressed, Elena noticed something wonderful happening.
Word was spreading through the palace about her meetings, and, instead of feeling nervous or suspicious, the staff seemed energized and touched. People were volunteering to stay late to help with preparations, offering ideas and assistance without being asked. By evening, Elena felt emotionally exhausted but deeply fulfilled. She had spent the entire day listening to stories, learning about dreams, and connecting with people she had known for years but never really understood.
Each conversation had added another layer to her growing vision for the Christmas gala.
Margaret found her in the library that evening, surrounded by notebooks filled with details about each staff member. Elena looked up with shining eyes, her face glowing with purpose. "Margaret," she said softly, "I understand now what Mother meant when she said that Christmas magic isn't something you create, it's something you discover. It's been here all along, in the hearts and stories of the people around us. I just needed to learn how to listen."
The morning of Christmas Eve arrived with a gentle snowfall that seemed to blanket the palace in anticipation.
Elena woke early, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and nervous energy. Today was the day of the charity gala, and everything she had planned would finally come together. She had spent the previous day finishing her conversations with the staff and putting the final touches on her surprise arrangements. Margaret arrived with breakfast and found Elena already dressed in a simple wool dress, sitting at her writing desk with dozens of handwritten notes scattered around her. Each note was carefully crafted, containing specific memories and personal observations that Elena had gathered during her meetings with the staff members. "The notes are beautiful," Margaret observed, picking up one addressed to Thomas the security guard. "You've written about his daughter's piano recital and how proud he was when he showed you the video on his phone." Elena looked up from her writing, a pen still in her hand. "I never realized how much joy people find in sharing the things they love."
Thomas's eyes completely lit up when he talked about his daughter's musical talent.
"It made me remember how my father used to beam with pride when I played violin at family gatherings." Margaret sat down in the chair across from the desk, watching Elena with maternal affection.
"You've rediscovered something precious this week, haven't you?"
"I've rediscovered the art of really seeing people," Elena replied, setting down her pen and stretching her tired fingers. "For so long, I've been so focused on my own role and responsibilities that I forgot to pay attention to the individuals who make my world possible." The princess stood and walked to her window, where she could see the final preparations taking place in the courtyard below. Staff members were hanging evergreen garlands and positioning luminaries along the pathway where guests would arrive that evening. Even from her high window, she could sense the energy and excitement building throughout the palace.
"Are you nervous about tonight?" Margaret asked gently. Elena considered the question carefully. "I'm nervous about whether I can pull off something this different from what people expect. But I'm not nervous about the intention behind it. I know in my heart that what we're doing is right."
A knock at the door interrupted their conversation, and Mrs. Cooper entered with a large basket filled with small wrapped packages. Her face was glowing with excitement as she set the basket down near Elena's desk. "The gifts are ready, Your Highness," Mrs. Cooper announced.
"Each one is specifically chosen based on what you learned about that person. The bookstore downtown helped us find a first-edition poetry collection for James the gardener.
The art supply shop prepared a beautiful watercolor set for Maria, who mentioned wanting to paint again after retirement."
Elena felt a surge of gratitude for Mrs. Cooper's attention to detail. "And the nursing textbook for Sarah?"
"Wrapped with a handwritten note of encouragement from the head nurse at St. Mary's Hospital, who happens to be my neighbor," Mrs. Cooper said proudly. She was so touched by Sarah's story that she offered to mentor her when she's ready to start her clinical rotations. Margaret smiled at the chain of kindness that had grown from Elena's simple desire to appreciate her staff. It's amazing how one gesture of genuine care can create ripples that extend far beyond what we originally planned. Elena nodded, feeling overwhelmed by the goodness she had witnessed over the past few days. "I keep thinking about something Mrs. Hartwell said yesterday. She told me that the best Christmas gifts aren't things you can wrap in paper, they're moments when someone truly sees you and values who you are. As the morning progressed, Elena made her final rounds through the palace, checking on last-minute preparations and offering words of encouragement to the staff. She found the kitchen team busy with final touches on the evening's menu, but she noticed something different about their usual pre-event energy. Instead of the stressed urgency that typically preceded royal functions, there was an atmosphere of joyful anticipation. "Your Highness," Mrs. Hartwell called out when she spotted Elena in the kitchen doorway. "We've added something special to tonight's dessert course, inspired by our conversation about family traditions. Each table will receive a selection of traditional Christmas sweets from different cultural backgrounds represented by our staff." Elena felt tears prick her eyes at this thoughtful addition. "Mrs. Hartwell, that's perfect. The guests will taste not just delicious food, but the heritage and love that goes into these family recipes." The afternoon flew by in a whirlwind of final preparations. Elena worked with Margaret to set up a special area in the library where the children would create their gifts for the staff. They had arranged simple craft supplies, construction paper, colored pencils, glue sticks, and ribbons. The goal wasn't perfection but heartfelt expression. At 4 o'clock, Elena retreated to her room to prepare for the evening. As her stylist arranged her hair and helped her into an elegant emerald green gown, Elena felt a calmness settle over her. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw not just a princess preparing for another royal duty, but a woman about to share something meaningful with people she cared about. Margaret appeared in the doorway as the stylist was putting finishing touches on Elena's appearance. "The first guests are arriving," she announced. "Are you ready?" Elena took a deep breath and nodded. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life." The grand ballroom had been transformed into a warm, intimate space despite its impressive size. Instead of the usual formal seating arrangements, Elena had requested round tables that encouraged conversation. Soft lighting from hundreds of candles created a golden glow that made everyone look beautiful and relaxed. The Christmas tree in the center of the room was decorated not with expensive ornaments, but with handmade decorations created by local children from the charities the gala supported. As guests began to arrive, Elena positioned herself near the entrance to personally welcome each person. She had abandoned the traditional receiving line in favor of genuine conversations. She asked about their families, remembered details from previous meetings, and introduced people to each other based on shared interests she had discovered. Lord and Lady Pemberton arrived with their 8-year-old daughter, Sophie, who had been looking forward to the evening for weeks. Instead of the usual formal greeting, Elena knelt down to Sophie's level and asked about the new puppy she had mentioned in a letter to the palace. "Princess Elena!" Sophie exclaimed, her face lighting up with delight. "Biscuit learned to sit and stay. Mummy says he's the smartest puppy in all of England." Elena laughed with genuine pleasure. "I can't wait to hear all about his training adventures. I have something special planned for the children tonight, and I hope you'll help me with it." As more families arrived, Elena noticed something wonderful happening. The children were immediately more relaxed and excited when they saw that the princess was interested in their stories. Parents seemed surprised but pleased by the genuine warmth of their reception. The usual stiffness that accompanied royal events was nowhere to be found. The Honorable James Mitchell, a prominent businessman, approached with his teenage son David, who looked distinctly uncomfortable in his formal attire. Elena remembered that David was passionate about environmental conservation and had started a recycling program at his school. "David," Elena said warmly, "I read about your environmental initiative in the school newsletter your father shared with me. I would love to hear more about it. We've actually been working on sustainability improvements here at the palace, and I think you might have some insights that could help us." David's eyes widened with surprise and interest. For the next 10 minutes, he animatedly explained his recycling program while his father watched with amazement. Elena listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and taking mental notes about ideas that could be implemented at the palace. "Your son is remarkably insightful," Elena told James Mitchell as their conversation concluded. "I hope he'll consider joining our Youth Environmental Council. We need passionate young voices to guide our conservation efforts." As the cocktail hour progressed, Elena moved through the room like a gracious host rather than a distant royal figure. She introduced the shy wife of a diplomat to the vivacious daughter of a cabinet minister, knowing they shared a love of classical music. She connected a recently retired general with a young entrepreneur, sensing they would appreciate each other's perspectives on leadership and innovation.
Margaret watched from across the room, marveling at Elena's transformation.
The princess was radiant with purpose, clearly thriving in this role of connector and facilitator. She was creating exactly the kind of warm, inclusive atmosphere she had envisioned.
When it came time to move into the dining room, Elena made an announcement that surprised many of the guests.
Before we enjoy our wonderful meal, I have something special planned. We're going to start our evening not with speeches, but with stories. Some of the remarkable people who work here at the palace have agreed to share Christmas traditions and memories that have shaped their lives. She gestured to Mrs. Hartwell, who stood near the kitchen entrance looking nervous but determined. Mrs. Hartwell has been creating magical Christmas meals for royal families for over 20 years, but tonight she's going to share the story behind the recipes that make her Christmas pudding so special. As Mrs. Hartwell stepped forward, Elena began to applaud, and the entire room joined in. The cook's nervousness melted away as she began to speak about her grandmother's kitchen, the secret ingredients that weren't found in any cookbook, and the love that transforms simple ingredients into memories that last forever.
The guests listened with rapt attention, many of them visibly moved by the authentic emotion in Mrs. Hartwell's voice.
When she finished, the applause was enthusiastic and heartfelt. Several guests approached her afterward, sharing their own family recipe stories and asking questions about her culinary traditions. James the gardener followed with a brief talk about the Christmas garden traditions from around the world, explaining how different cultures use plants and flowers to celebrate the holiday season. He had brought samples of evergreen branches, holly, and mistletoe, passing them around so guests could experience the natural fragrances that had been part of Christmas celebrations for centuries. In my home country of Wales, James said with quiet pride, we believe that bringing living green into our homes during winter connects us to the promise of spring and renewal. Every Christmas decoration tells a story of hope and continuity. Elena watched the faces of her guests as they listened to James speak, and she saw something beautiful happening. Walls were coming down, pretenses were being set aside, and people were connecting with each other on a human level. The formal boundaries between royalty, aristocracy, and working people were dissolving in the face of shared stories and genuine appreciation. The third story came from Sarah, the housekeeper who was studying to become a nurse. She spoke about Christmas celebrations in Jamaica, where her grandmother had taught her that the holiday was about opening your heart to welcome everyone as family. She described the tradition of preparing extra food for unexpected guests, believing that generosity creates the space for miracles to happen. My grandmother used to say that Christmas magic doesn't come from what you receive, but from how much love you can give away, Sarah concluded, her voice soft but strong. Working here at the palace has taught me that service is just another form of love, and love is what makes every day feel like a gift. The applause that followed Sarah's words was different from typical royal event applause. It was warmer, more personal, and filled with genuine emotion. Elena noticed several guests wiping away tears, clearly moved by the wisdom and grace they had just witnessed. As the guests moved into the dining room, Elena felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The evening was unfolding exactly as she had hoped, with authentic connection replacing polite conversation and real appreciation taking the place of formal obligation. The Christmas magic she had been searching for was blooming all around her, created not by elaborate decorations or expensive entertainment, but by the simple act of honoring the humanity in every person present. The dining room glowed with warmth as guests settled into their carefully arranged seats. Elena had worked with Margaret to ensure that each table brought together people who might not normally have the opportunity to really know each other. Children sat beside adults, diplomats found themselves next to artists, and business leaders discovered they were sharing conversation with teachers and community volunteers. As the first course was served, Elena noticed something remarkable happening at each table. The stories shared by the staff members had created an atmosphere where everyone felt permission to be more authentic. Conversations that might have remained safely superficial were becoming deeper and more meaningful. At the table nearest to Elena, she overheard 10-year-old Emma asking Lady Catherine about her childhood Christmases. Instead of giving a polite, brief answer, Lady Catherine found herself telling stories about her grandmother's house in the countryside, complete with descriptions of sledding down frozen hills and building snow forts that lasted until spring. My grandmother always said that the best Christmas presents were the ones you made yourself, Lady Catherine was saying, her usually reserved demeanor replaced by animated enthusiasm.
One year, I spent weeks knitting scarves for everyone in the family. They were absolutely dreadful, all different lengths and full of dropped stitches, but everyone wore them to Christmas dinner anyway. Emma giggled with delight. I made Christmas cards for everyone this year, but I used so much glitter that Mummy says we'll be finding sparkles in the carpet until Easter. Elena smiled as she listened, remembering her own childhood craft projects that had been more enthusiasm than skill. The conversation continued around that table, with Lord Pemberton sharing memories of Christmas morning cricket matches with his brothers, despite the December cold, and Mrs. Davies, a local school principal, describing the Christmas pageants her students performed each year. Halfway through the main course, Elena stood to make the announcement she had been both anticipating and dreading. Her heart raced as she looked around the room at the faces of people who had become more than guests, they had become participants in something special. My friends, Elena began, her voice carrying clearly through the room, when I was planning tonight's gathering, I realized that Christmas has always been about recognizing the gifts that people bring into our lives. Not material gifts, but the gifts of service, creativity, compassion, and dedication. She paused, making eye contact with various staff members who were positioned around the room, ready for what was about to unfold. Tonight, I want to take a moment to acknowledge some very special people who have given me and my family countless gifts throughout the years. Elena gestured to Margaret, who began distributing the handwritten notes and carefully chosen gifts to each staff member. As she did, Elena spoke about what she had learned from each person during their conversations over the past few days. Mrs. Hartwell, Elena said, as Margaret presented the cook with her gift and note, you have fed our bodies for 20 years, but, more importantly, you have nourished our souls with your care and attention to detail. Your dreams of visiting your sister in Scotland have inspired me to think about my own neglected relationships, and so your gift tonight includes not just our gratitude, but train tickets to Edinburgh, with a week's paid vacation to spend with the family you miss so deeply. Mrs. Hartwell's hands flew to her mouth in surprise, tears streaming down her cheeks as she realized the magnitude of the gift. The guests around the room began to applaud, but Elena could see that many of them were as moved as Mrs. Hartwell herself. James, Elena continued, turning to the gardener who stood near the windows overlooking his beloved grounds, your poetry about the healing power of gardens has touched my heart. You write about plants the way others write about children, with protective love and infinite hope. Tonight, along with our thanks, you're receiving something that I hope will help your poetry reach a wider audience. Margaret handed James a package that contained not just a leather-bound journal for his writing, but also a letter from a publisher who had agreed to review his work after Elena had shared some of his poems. James looked stunned, his weathered hands shaking slightly as he held the unexpected opportunity to share his passion with the world. Elena moved through the room, acknowledging each staff member with the same personal attention and thoughtfully chosen gifts. Sarah received not only the nursing textbooks she needed, but also a scholarship to cover her remaining tuition costs. Thomas, the security guard, was presented with a professional recording session for his daughter's musical demo, something he could never have afforded on his own, but that might change his daughter's entire future. As Elena spoke about each person, she noticed that the guests were becoming increasingly engaged and emotional. Many of them seemed surprised to learn about the rich inner lives of the people who served them during royal events. They were seeing these individuals not as invisible staff, but as human beings with dreams, talents, and stories worth celebrating. What strikes me most, Elena said as she concluded the recognition ceremony, is that each of these remarkable people has taught me something about the true meaning of Christmas. They've shown me that the greatest gift we can give each other is genuine attention, authentic appreciation, and the recognition that every person has value that extends far beyond their job title. The applause that followed was unlike anything Elena had ever heard at a royal event. It was enthusiastic and sustained, filled with genuine emotion and respect. Many guests rose to their feet, and Elena noticed that several were approaching staff members to continue conversations and express their own appreciation. Margaret appeared at Elena's side, her eyes shining with pride and affection. "My dear," she whispered, "you've accomplished something remarkable tonight. You've reminded everyone in this room what it feels like to be truly seen and valued." Elena felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the applause or recognition. For the first time in years, she felt aligned with her deepest values and authentic self. The crown on her head felt less like a burden and more like a tool for creating positive change. As the formal dinner portion of the evening concluded, Elena announced the final element of her surprise. I have one more invitation for all of you tonight. The children among us have been working on a very special project, and they've asked if they could share it with everyone. She gestured toward the library, where the children had been crafting their gifts for the staff earlier in the evening. If you would join me, I believe you'll find that some of the most profound Christmas wisdom comes from our youngest guests. The entire group moved to the library, where each child stood beside a small display of their handmade gifts. Emma had created bookmarks decorated with pressed flowers for the staff members who loved to read. Sophie had made friendship bracelets using colors that reminded her of each person's personality. David, the environmentally conscious teenager, had crafted small plantings in recycled containers, each chosen to represent something meaningful about the recipient. But it was young Oliver, the 7-year-old son of the French ambassador, who brought tears to everyone's eyes. He had spent the evening making clay ornaments, each one unique and slightly imperfect in the way that only children's crafts can be. As he presented his gift to Mrs. Hartwell, he looked up at her with serious eyes. "This ornament is for your Christmas tree," Oliver said in his careful English, heavily accented but clear. "I made it special because you make food that tastes like hugs, and everyone needs hugs at Christmas." Mrs. Hartwell knelt down to Oliver's level, accepting the small clay ornament with reverence usually reserved for priceless artifacts. "This is the most beautiful ornament I've ever received," she told him, her voice thick with emotion. "It will have the place of honor on my tree, not just this Christmas, but every Christmas for the rest of my life." As the children presented their gifts, Elena watched the adults in the room. She saw hardened business executives wiping away tears as they witnessed pure generosity in action. She noticed diplomatic spouses asking children about their creative processes and genuinely listening to the answers. The barriers of age, social status, and cultural background were dissolving in the presence of authentic human connection. Lord Pemberton approached Elena as the gift-giving concluded. "Your Highness," he said quietly, "I've attended royal events for 30 years, but I've never experienced anything like tonight. My daughter Sophie hasn't stopped talking about how special she feels because you remembered details about her life. And watching these children give so generously to your staff has reminded me of values I'd somehow forgotten in my focus on business and protocol." Elena felt a deep satisfaction at his words. "Lord Pemberton, that's exactly what I hoped would happen tonight. I wanted everyone to remember that Christmas isn't about perfect performances or impressive displays. It's about recognition, appreciation, and the joy that comes from giving pieces of our hearts to each other." As the evening drew to a close, guests lingered much longer than they typically would at royal events. Conversations continued organically, with people exchanging contact information and making plans to stay connected. Children were making friends across cultural and social lines, while adults discovered shared interests and passions they never would have known about in more formal circumstances. Elena found herself in the garden courtyard as the last guests were preparing to leave. Snow was still falling gently, creating a magical winter wonderland illuminated by the soft lights strung throughout the trees. Margaret joined her, both women wrapped in warm coats, watching families make their way to their cars with hearts full of unexpected joy. "Look," Margaret said softly, pointing toward the main entrance. Mrs. Hartwell was standing with Lady Catherine and Emma, all three of them laughing as Emma showed Mrs. Hartwell how to make a proper snow angel. The sight of a royal guest and a palace cook lying side by side in the snow, creating art with their bodies while a child directed their technique, perfectly captured the spirit of the evening. "This is what Christmas should always feel like," Elena murmured, feeling tears of gratitude freezing on her cheeks in the cold air. Not perfect, not formal, not calculated for effect. Just real people sharing real moments and discovering that we're all more connected than we ever imagined. Margaret slipped her arm through Elena's, the gesture both protective and celebrating. "You found your way back to yourself tonight, dear one. Your parents would be so proud of the woman you've become and the princess you've chosen to be." Elena leaned into Margaret's warmth, feeling more at peace than she had in years. "I finally understand what Mother meant when she said that being royal isn't about being set apart from people, it's about using your position to bring people together. Tonight wasn't about showing anyone how generous or gracious I am. It was about creating space for everyone to show the best parts of themselves."
As they watched the last car disappear into the snowy night, Elena felt a profound shift in her understanding of her role and her life. The loneliness that had plagued her for months had been replaced by a sense of connection that extended far beyond the palace walls. She had discovered that Christmas magic wasn't something that happened to her, but something she could create by approaching each relationship with curiosity, appreciation, and authentic care. The staff members were cleaning up inside the palace, but their movements were unhurried and their voices carried laughter and excitement. Elena could hear them sharing stories about the gifts they had received and the conversations they had enjoyed with guests. The evening had transformed not just the guests' experience, but the staff's understanding of their value and importance. As Elena and Margaret finally went inside, they passed by the kitchen where Mrs. Hartwell was carefully placing Oliver's clay ornament in a place of honor on her workstation. The simple, imperfect gift seemed to glow in the warm kitchen light, a symbol of the unexpected treasures that emerge when people approach each other with open hearts. Elena climbed the stairs to her private apartments feeling exhausted but exhilarated. She had planned a Christmas event, but what she had actually created was a celebration of human connection that would ripple outward from this night for years to come. The guests would remember not just the elegant setting or delicious food, but the feeling of being truly seen and valued. The staff would carry forward the knowledge that their contributions were recognized and appreciated. And the children would grow up with memories of a Christmas when adults listened to them with respect and encouraged their natural generosity. As she prepared for bed, Elena looked out her window at the snow-covered gardens where James tended his plants with such devotion. Tomorrow, there would be newspaper articles about the Royal Christmas Gala, but they would miss the real story. The real story was about a princess who remembered how to see people as individuals rather than roles, and how that simple change in perspective had created magic that touched every heart in the room. Elena fell asleep that Christmas Eve with a smile on her face and peace in her heart, knowing that she had finally found her way home to the values and connections that made life meaningful. The tender royal Christmas moment she had created wasn't just a single evening's event, it was the beginning of a new way of approaching her life and responsibilities, one that honored both the dignity of her position and the humanity of everyone she served.